the Bell 47, the world's first civilian helicopter, and rescue troops aboard Korea's Angel of Mercy. Enter the kingdom of the skies tonight on Choppers in the building of an angel.
After 9 years, Ship 1 had no clutch, so the crew had to spin the rotors to allow the engine to start. The stabilizer bar, Young's unique development, was now a permanent part of the design. In the first tests to find out how the controls responded, Ship 1 was tied down with a fixed landing gear of widely angled struts for stability. Arthur Young was the first pilot, and he made these tethered hops with the help of his old friend and assistant, Bart Kelly.
At the very early stages, we hadn't refined the rotor so that we had it perfectly balanced. And as it would get up to speed, it'd start shaking. And this was a very critical question. Normally, one could expect that it would clear up, you could go through resonance. In other words, after it shook for a while, then as you got to a higher speed, it would stop shaking, be all right. So I was determined to get through resonance, come hell or high water, and I gave it the gun, and it did go through resonance and sweetened up perfectly. This was before we were flying, of course. And then I sort of shut it off and wiped my brow, and at that moment, Bart comes rushing out, holding a piece of paper, saying, "Don't go through resonance, you'll blow up."
Another incident almost ended in tragedy. A Bell Company executive, who was also a test pilot, insisted he fly Ship 1. Arthur Young tried to discourage him, and when that failed, tried to explain the controls. But the executive wasn't interested.
In any case, he got into the thing and jiggled the controls around until it started bucking, and the tail went into the rotor and gave such a jolt to the thing that he was thrown through the rotor. I thought this was curtains, the end of everything. I rushed over to him because he was thrown out about 30 feet, but he was all right. He was just broken wrist, but he didn't bother us anymore.
The crash set the program back. Ship 1 had to be stripped down and reassembled, and a new set of rotors machined. The young man shaping these rotor blades out of solid wood had been trained by Arthur in the pre-Bell days to make rotor blades for the small-scale models, at a time when the need to replace broken rotors was an everyday event. Ship 1 featured a vertically mounted Franklin engine. It was a focal point the day rival helicopter pioneer Igor Sikorsky made his only visit to Gardenville.
It was a great...
And the RPM of the Franklin engine, an exact calculation of engine power was possible. Franklin claimed 160 horsepower.
We could get very accurate figures on horsepower, and this was embarrassing to Franklin because we could never get the power that they claimed we could get from the engine. See, this way I could measure the power without any doubt about it.
The full-scale helicopter in tethered hover showed the same stability as the small model. In June 1943, Ship 1 was ready to be tested in forward flight. The only convenient place was a small grassy meadow outside the Gardenville building. Pilot Floyd Carlson found that under speeds of 20 miles an hour, it performed well. But when he attempted higher speeds, an old problem reappeared in a different form.
We had trouble with what we called 2 per rev. That's a vibration that sets in as you get going, about 30 miles an hour. And in the conservative flying I'd done, I'd not run into it. But when Floyd started to go faster, he ran into this severe vibration. And we had to solve that, which we did by stiffening the rotor.
But it wasn't that simple. The problem needed experimentation. And rather than experiment with Ship 1, Arthur Young pressed one of his old models back into service. A solution was eventually suggested by Floyd Carlson. He proposed a system of bracing the rotor blades, which you can see at the top of the mast. In honor of his Swedish ancestry, it was named the Swedish yoke, and it did the job perfectly. The first free flights in this form, in the large space of a Buffalo airfield, were an immediate success.
He took off and was immediately flying over 70 miles an hour with no trouble at all. We didn't have room for a passenger, but we gave the dog a ride. And actually, at one point, the wheel fell off. But there was no problem because I just stuck the wheel in like a caster while he hovered. Yes, that was a famous day.
After this success, Ship 1 emerged with a complete skin and a new paint job. It was now a fully fledged helicopter, the pride of the Gardenville project. The next test was to be a power-off landing under auto-rotation. This was the second with a mild flare or nose-up attitude. Then came the third.
So he flared even more, which meant that the ship landed at a 45-degree angle and then smashed down on the front. And it all ground up in itself, and then we were amazed to see Floyd just climb out. And someone said, "Are you all right?" And he said, "Yes, God damn it."
Arthur Young on the right looks at the damage, and the unscathed Floyd Carlson suggests a modification to the landing gear to prevent a repeat of the accident. Ship 1 will have to be rebuilt.
Choppers.
September 1943. A new helicopter emerges from the Gardenville garage. This is Ship 2 with its enclosed cockpit. It was designed to have a family resemblance to the Bell Company's World War II fighter, the Airocobra. The only passengers to fly in Ship 1 had been Arthur Young's dog Brian and a bag of cement. Larry Bell, the company president, had still not flown. Now he was to get his chance. His first vertical ascent would be in Ship 2.
And that had a seat wide enough for two persons. And that was the one that Larry had his ride in. I think it was March 1944.
According to Bartram Kelly, Larry's reaction to his ride was that as an old farm boy, it allowed him to look at cows from an entirely new angle. There were many visitors to Gardenville, anxious to see and even touch this new marvel. Among them was a group of Russian generals.
And these generals were looking at it, and one of them in particular kept reaching in and turning knobs and things. And I said, "No, mustn't do that." But he kept on doing it, so I slapped his wrist, and then he stopped. So I have the distinction of having slapped a Russian general's wrist.
Model 30 Ship 2 was a thoroughly practical, maneuverable helicopter, except that the two-seater space was somewhat cramped. It would have appeared much earlier, but Bell's insistence on the cosmetic similarity to the Airocobra had slowed production down. But now, in the spring of 1944, with Ship 1 repaired and displaying a splendid yellow color scheme, it appeared that Arthur Young had fulfilled the terms of his agreement with Larry Bell to build two helicopters. And now it was time to put these machines before the public. These were still the very early days of helicopter flight, and there were records to be broken. This is the Armory in Buffalo on May 10, 1944. Floyd Carlson puts on a show for the officers and cadets of the Civil Air Patrol, and in the process makes the first indoor helicopter flight in the Western Hemisphere. His only problem is coping with the blinding glare of the spotlight. July 4th, the same year, Ship 1 is the star of the show in front of a crowd of 42,000 at the Buffalo Civil Stadium. Again, Floyd Carlson is the pilot, and for most of these people, seeing for the first time a helicopter going through its bag of tricks, this is a rare glimpse of the future. But back at the Bell factory, Larry Bell's engineers, having learned some lessons from Arthur Young's project, were designing their own helicopter, Model 42. It was built like an airplane, with room for 4 passengers, but it would never go into production. Meanwhile, Arthur Young was building another helicopter, but it was not exactly authorized, and Bell management wasn't aware it was being built. This rare film shows how little attention was given to aesthetic appearance, but by now the Gardenville project knew what worked and what didn't. Ship 3 was a real helicopter, using all the best features of Ships 1 and 2. It became the basis of the Bell 47, America's first civil helicopter.
Well, we did get a windshield in the form of this bubble, which was dreamed up by a friend of mine who came. I'd known him socially before I went to Bell, Joe Parrish. He had the idea of taking a sheet of plexiglass, heating it in the furnace, laying it on a flat table, and then putting a template over it to confine the shape, and blowing with compressed air just the way you'd blow a soap bubble.
The Bell 47 would appear in many different versions, but the bubble became its signature. For Arthur Young, the arrival of the 47 meant the end of his association with helicopters.
The 47 was about to be a production model. We had the drawings all finished, and the production line was started, and they were beginning to come off the line. So I thought my task was done.
But the man who had begun working with model helicopters in 1931 had another reason for leaving this phase of his career. Arthur Young was fascinated by pure science and the study of philosophy. In August 1945, the world was changed forever by a single event. The nuclear age had arrived.
And this reminded me that I didn't want to go on wasting my time making machinery. It was fun to make machinery, but there were more important things. And as I put it to myself at the time, we needed a mental A-bomb, something that would enlarge our horizons as the physical bomb had enlarged mechanical horizons. And that's what I spent the rest of my life on.
And while Arthur Young went off to pursue his philosophy for the post-nuclear age, the Bell 47, in its many different forms, military and civil, flew into history.
Advanced technology has changed the world.